system. Okay. We left off on Monday talking about small branches of arteries and arterioles, right? Artery, big. Brachial artery, femoral artery, right? Big pipes that are going to carry blood to places. As it gets near a tissue, it branches off. You get these arterioles, and then the arterioles themselves branch and branch and branch and branch. Okay. And we talked about this idea that we can either squeeze the artery down, the arteriole down, make its diameter very small, which raises the pressure and makes it more difficult for blood to go through there. Or we can widen out the arteriole. It's called dilation. We can make it bigger, which lowers the pressure and allows more blood to go through. And so if I do that here on these kind of primary and secondary arterioles, everything downstream either gets more or less blood flow. And this is the primary way that we control where blood goes in the body. Okay, this is how we control where blood goes. I can ask any of you to stand up. We could try to embarrass you. Your face gets flushed. We are vasodilating to the blood vessels that send blood to the skin of your face, right? Fight or flight response. That's going to happen there. Okay. In that same instance, when you get spooked and we stress you, you squeeze down on the arteries and the arterioles that go to the liver, the kidney, and your stomach. You don't need to digest food or make urine if you're about to get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, right? You need to be able to run away. And so we're going to use this to control how we shift where the blood goes in our body around, okay? And so I'm going to walk you guys through a little bit of the mechanisms behind all of that in the next couple of slides, okay? We mentioned on Monday that arteries and arterioles and veins to some extent have a layer of what's called smooth muscle that circles around, right? That circle around those vessels. And as we either contract or relax that smooth muscle, it squeezes down or lets them sort of dilate out and get bigger. Okay? That's the role of smooth muscle. We also mentioned on Monday that inside of them, the layer of cells on the most inside layer of cells is called the endothelium. Okay? The endothelium. This is the cells that make contact with blood, and it's unbelievably important because the endothelium monitors how fast the blood is moving through those vessels, and the endothelium can communicate with the smooth muscle. And I'll talk to you guys about those signals in a minute, but it can communicate, and it can specifically tell the smooth muscle to relax. Okay. And so we mentioned on Monday that if you have atherosclerosis or something where you have fatty plaques that cover up the endothelium, it can't contact the blood correctly, and therefore it can't send its normal signals to the smooth muscle. So generally we use the endothelial layer to tell smooth muscle to relax, and we use sympathetic nerve innervation, which it's called a plexus of perivascular sympathetic nerves. All it is there are sympathetic nerves that connect to the vascular smooth muscle. Okay. And when they release epinephrine and norepinephrine, it tells the smooth muscle most of the time, not in every tissue, but in most tissues, to vasoconstrict. Okay. So I spook you, you get a fight or flight response, you're going to vasoconstrict. You exercise and blood velocity increases. That's picked up in the endothelium, and it says, okay, make the smooth muscle relax. And we're going to use sort of this, you can think of this as like a dance in some ways between this kind of complementary effects of each of these. We're going to vasodilate to tissues that need more blood and vasoconstrict in tissues that don't need the blood for whatever activity it is that we're doing at that given moment. And I'll walk you guys through that in the coming slides. Okay, Tyler.
Is the monomer function similar to barrier receptor?
sometimes. It is not a baroreceptor per se. Baroreceptors, right, are going to check, they're checking pressure and those things, and they can send signals and modify things also, but the endothelial layer is monitoring velocity specifically, or something we call shear stress.
Wow. Are you going to get into it?
So the how is more complicated, and we'll get into it just a little bit, Soren, okay? So y'all are talking about sort of graduate level cardiovascular physiology, which is great, and I'm happy to talk to you guys through some of that, but it's a little bit beyond the scope of what we need for class, okay? What you see here in this top one, okay, those little rings on there, the little Michelin tire man, look, that's vascular smooth muscle. These rings of smooth muscle around the vessels, okay? And then in the bottom picture, they've taken and they've dissolved the smooth muscle, they've dissolved the blood vessel itself, but then they've stained and all they've left is the nerves. So you can imagine that this is also connecting into what you see up here. These are all of those sympathetic nerves that are going to line around a blood vessel, and they're going to be able to send signals to our smooth muscle. Okay? That's what this looks like. So all of your arteries and arterioles have a setup that look like this. Okay? All right. So before we get into kind of some of the individual signals in those things, I want us to take a step back, and we're going to talk about how fluid moves through a tube and why that is so important for understanding cardiovascular system stuff. Okay. So if we look at factors that affect blood flow, okay, the rate at which blood flows through our system, okay, follows what we call the laws of hydrodynamics that are applied to rigid cylindrical things. So it's basically blood is a fluid, and when you move a fluid through a pipe, okay, just like the plumbing in your house or in our building here, there are certain physical laws that must follow, and your blood moves following those same kinds of things. Okay, so there are two factors that are primarily going to be related to how and why blood moves in the way that it does. Okay, first is pressure. Blood moves in your body from areas of high pressure to low pressure. High pressure to low. If that is the case, if we think about it kind of in a very, very big picture, the highest pressure for blood anywhere in your body should be where? Where specifically in the heart, sorry?
In the left ventricle.
In the left ventricle. The heart contracts. Pressure in the left ventricle, that's the highest pressure it's going to be anywhere. Okay, anywhere. Because it starts its move from there, and then as it moves out away from the heart, pressure gradually falls. So it falls in the arteries, it falls further into the arterioles, it falls even further as it goes into the capillaries, and then it falls more as it moves through the venules and the veins and back. The area of lowest pressure in a blood vessel in your body should be the superior vena cava. Okay? It should be the superior vena cava. So blood, like all fluid, moves from high pressure to low pressure. Okay? So flow is related to a difference in pressure from one side of a tube to another. It's also inversely related to the resistance encountered to fluid flow. And you may say, Dr. Black, what the fuck is resistance to flow? Okay. All right. Now, everybody do this. Okay. What I want you to do, and I hope everybody brushed your teeth this morning, is everyone, we're just going to do this going forward. All right. I want you to blow air out. Go. Okay. All right. I want you to do something to raise the resistance to the air leaving your mouth. Try to blow air out, but do something to stop the air from coming out. Okay. Some of you have squeezed your lips tighter together. Some of you are putting your hand up there. Okay. That's resistance, right? How many of you have ever taken, right, like a gardening hose, like a water hose, and tried to shoot the water at somebody out of the hose? How many of you all have done this? Okay. Some of y'all are sheepishly like, yes. What do you do to make the water shoot farther? Put your thumb over it. Okay. You have the same amount of water. And if we change the size of the end on the hose, we alter the resistance to that flow, and then we alter the pressure coming through there, which then leads to the water shooting farther. You squeeze the water through a smaller space, resistance to flow goes up, the pressure goes up, boom, it shoots out farther. Okay? That's the concept of what we're going to do in your body. Okay? Pressure is highest in the left ventricle. When I change the diameter, either by squeezing down and raising resistance and raising pressure, or by relaxing vessels and lowering pressure and lowering resistance, I can control where the blood goes. Okay? So let me show you an illustration of some of the laws about why this works in the way that it does, and then we'll put it into practice. Okay? Sorry, this is physics. I apologize. It's just one of those things that we have to do. Okay? There's a thing called Ohm's law. And Ohm's law tells us that flow, this is of air or of a fluid, is equal to the delta or the difference in pressure from one end of a tube to another divided by the resistance to movement of that fluid, okay, or of air, okay? Difference in pressure. So it's the difference in pressure from inside the left ventricle to inside the aorta, or from inside the aorta to inside the brachial artery, okay? Now, there's another law called Poiseuille's law. I promise I'll not make you all spell Poiseuille. Poiseuille's law tells us that resistance to flow of a fluid or of air is equal to 8 multiplied by N, which is the viscosity of the fluid or the air, multiplied by the length of your tube, divided by pi, multiplied by the radius of the tube to the 4th power. You don't have to know all of this, okay? But I can tell you that 8 is a constant. The viscosity of your blood is generally pretty constant, okay? We can't really change that. The length of your vessels, we can't change that. They are what they are. So all of this is constant. So just throw it away, okay? So basically, resistance is equal to some number divided by pi, which is constant, multiplied by radius to the 4th power. So the big thing that affects resistance to flow that goes into our top equation is the radius. So vessel diameter is the primary, or vessel radius is the primary determinant of resistance to flow. Okay? So left ventricular pressure, we can make it go up and down a little bit by epinephrine and norepinephrine by changing contractility, but it stays in a range, right? So the biggest way that we control where blood goes and what happens is by just changing the resistance, and we do that by changing the radius, by changing the diameter, by constricting or dilating a blood vessel. So you put these things together and you get what's called Poiseuille's equation. And it says flow is equal to the differences in pressure multiplied by pi times radius to the 4th power divided by all of our junk that we don't have any control over. And so basically, right, flow is difference in pressure. So with the same difference in pressure, pi is constant. All I have to do is change the radius a little bit. If the radius goes up, so I vasodilate just a little bit, because it's to the 4th power, I get this giant increase in flow. because it's to the fourth power, if I shrink it down just a little bit, I get a big change in flow in the negative direction. I can make flow go down. Okay. So understanding these physical laws that govern blood flow, that govern fluid movement, can let us understand how and why when we change contractility, but mostly when we just change the diameter or change the radius of arterioles, we can send blood to some places and we can keep it from going to others. Okay. So when you have a regular vessel and I constrict it and it gets smaller like this, the radius of that circle shrinks, then I get way less blood flow going through there. When I dilate it and I make it bigger, I get way more blood that goes through there. Okay. Does that make sense? I don't want you guys to get lost in the equations. I don't want you to get lost on what is L and all of this. The very, very basic thing is this is just a mathematical way to explain why vasoconstricting or vasodilating arterioles has a dramatic effect on where the blood goes. Okay. Generally, we don't change the diameter or the radius of our arteries very much. We do a little bit, but not very much. They're so big and they carry blood to so many places that we would not want to completely close down, say, your brachial artery, because then everything downstream gets no blood and that could be bad, right? But if I don't want blood to go, say, to my bicep, I can leave the brachial artery pretty much intact, but I just clamp down the arterioles in the bicep so I don't get blood going to the bicep or very much, and I will then send it to my tricep or to my forearm or someplace else. Okay? Does that as a general idea make sense to you guys? Because that's what we're trying to do. Okay? That's what we're trying to do. Okay. Now, let's put this into practice. Okay? At rest and during exercise for you guys. Where is the blood in your body? This is really, really, really important. Okay? Where's the blood in your body? Right now.
In your veins.
In my veins, yes. Which particular veins? Like, what tissues in your body are getting most blood right now as we sit here?
Stomach, if you're digesting breakfast.
Stomach if I'm digesting breakfast. Right? Good for you guys that didn't eat breakfast. Less stomach blood flow. Okay? We say at rest, blood tends to be more concentrated in what we call the splenic regions, which is liver, stomach, intestines, kidneys. So right here in your core. Okay? Right in your core. We're digesting food. We're absorbing the nutrients from that food. We're cleaning the blood in the liver. We're cleaning it further and making urine in the kidneys. This is kind of resting, normal processes. Okay. So you've got a little kind of close to about 50 to maybe 60% of your blood is going to those areas at rest. Skeletal muscle only gets about 15% of your blood flow at rest. All tissues need blood to stay alive. So you're always going to be sending some blood to skeletal muscle. Always some to the brain, always some to your heart, et cetera, et cetera. But at rest, only about 15% is in skeletal muscle. As you begin to exercise, you shift from 15% of the blood going to skeletal muscle to about 80% going to skeletal muscle. Okay? So everybody stand up. We're going to put this in practice. Y'all look a little sleepy. Let's do some squats. I'll squat with y'all, okay? I've got my stretchy dress pants on. Okay. Now, you're here. 15% of the blood is here. All right? Now, let's do some squats, okay? Down, up. That feels nice. Down, up. You have already, keep it going, okay? Let's do a set of 10. When we do 10, you guys have already begun to send blood flow to your working skeletal muscle. So it's going to quads, glutes, hamstrings, gastroc, soleus, TA, okay? Stop. You're already sending blood there. In the midst of doing that, okay, there are going to be very specific signals that we're going to send that are going to say that. When the blood goes to muscle, it goes away from here, okay? It goes away from the splenic regions. Again, if you're squatting, you don't need to be digesting food, right? All right, down we go, okay? So, I also want to illustrate one other thing. This is where it's fun. Katie, what happened to your heart rate while you were exercising? It went up. If your heart rate goes up, what happens to your cardiac output? It increases. Good. What happens? We haven't really talked about stroke volume, but stroke volume goes up too. So exercise does two things, okay? And they work collectively to send a whole bunch of blood to skeletal muscle, which is a really good thing. You shift to where the muscles get most of the blood, but also by increasing cardiac output, you're also sending more and more blood total through the system that's also primarily going only to skeletal muscle. So if we look at this, okay, cardiac output and blood flow to active muscles can increase by up to about 25 times during exercise, during high intensity exercise. Most of you can make your cardiac output go up 5 or 6 times from where it is at rest. By sending 80% of the blood, or in some instances almost 90% of the blood to working muscles, the blood that muscle that's exercising sees may be 20, 25 times what it is at rest. So we have this tremendous capacity to send all of this oxygenated blood that has nutrients in it to the muscles that are contracting, so we can exercise at a very high capacity. Okay? So that's what's going to happen. Now, there's some other conditions when we eat, when you have heat stress that can alter blood distribution. When you eat, blood goes to your digestive system. Hey, guess why they tell you don't go swimming for a half an hour or an hour after you've eaten?
You don't throw up
Right, but why would you throw up at it?
because you haven't digested properly.
You haven't digested properly, right? You eat, blood starts going here, then you jump in the pool, and it all goes out to your muscles, and you have undigested food left sitting in your stomach, which doesn't feel real pleasant. That's why. Okay? That's why. When it's hot, we vasodilate to our skin to try to dissipate heat. And so at some point when you exercise and it's hot outside, there's a competition between the muscles and your skin for blood flow. And if you're motivated enough, the muscles will win. And that can be very, very dangerous for your ability to dissipate heat. Okay, but it all functions in the same mechanism. It's all about dilating and constricting blood vessels. Okay. Okay. So let's talk about the two things that are primarily going on that are going to send blood to certain tissues, pull it away from other tissues. All right. And we'll use this context of what was happening during our squats. Okay. The first idea of how we control blood flow is something called autoregulation. Autoregulation is in essence local control. Okay. Local control. What this means is that the individual tissue itself, the stomach, your bicep, right? Whatever muscles control your toes that I have forgotten because I've never had anatomy, okay? Right? They're going to send signals to the arterioles that go to those tissues and regulate the amount of blood that that tissue is going to receive, okay? So, when you think about this from a skeletal muscle perspective, I start doing squats, okay? I'm using my quads. As I use my quads, metabolic rate in the quads increase. So oxygen demand goes up there, right? We're sending action potential, so there's potassium that's around. Initially, there may be hydrogen ions and lactic acid that are there. All of these signals that are in that muscle are going to tell the arterioles that also go to that muscle to vasodilate. Okay? They're going to tell it to vasodilate. Additionally, as we start exercising and cardiac output increases, the velocity of blood that moves through those vessels goes up. Okay? If you were measuring, and we can do this, Dr. Paddock has an ultrasound, he can do this, Dr. Kellerwan has an ultrasound, he can do it, it's a very important thing. So if I had you do hand grip exercise, and I put an ultrasound on your brachial artery, you will see how quickly blood flows at like 2 meters per second or something here at rest. You start doing exercise downstream,
What?
velocity moving through your brachial artery may go up 3, 4, 10-fold. As the velocity goes up, the endothelium senses that. And what it actually senses is not the velocity. It senses something called shear stress. Okay? Anybody ever seen blood under a microscope? What does blood look like under a microscope?
The little.
Oh, New Jersey.
Maybe not platelets.
Yeah, there always is.
What? What is blood mostly made up of? Red blood cells. Okay. Anybody ever seen someone, and if not, you can just Google this. You can get on YouTube or TikTok and find this. Anybody ever seen people try to strip paint off of a car or something doing what's called sandblasting? Right? It's mostly water, but it has some sand in it. Right? And you turn the hose on and it just goes, but the sand, right, that is in there moves very fast, creates extra friction. Okay. Your blood is like water that has sand in it. It's water that has a bunch of little cells in there. And those cells tumble by each other and they brush up against the endothelium. Right? And so it's like original Karate Kid, Mr. Miyagi style. If we do this, right, you create friction, right? You can sense that friction, things get hot, but you can feel that. So as blood velocity increases, more and more red blood cells tumble by and create shear, right, or this sort of same movement idea here on the endothelium. And that tells the endothelium velocity is pretty high. We don't want to basically blast off those cells. So the response then is the endothelium activates an enzyme, which then causes the generation of a molecule called nitric oxide. Not nitrous oxide, not laughing gas, what you get when you go to the dentist. Okay. Not nitrous, which is what we put in our cars on Fast and the Furious to make them go faster. And those kinds of things, but nitric oxide. Nitric oxide, when it's generated, tells vascular smooth muscle to relax. And so those vessels open out. Their diameter gets bigger. And as the diameter gets bigger, the pressure drops. So more blood will go through. But because it's a bigger pipe, it's like pulling your thumb off of the water hose. And it slows down the velocity of stuff moving through there. And by slowing the velocity, we lessen the shear stress. Okay. And so that's how that signal is going to work. Okay. This is local control. We are going to get things in our tissue that are going to call in more blood. As that more blood comes, the velocity goes up. That leads to more shear stress, which leads to this release of nitric oxide. We're going to get vasodilation. And now we're getting more and more blood, lower pressures, wider diameters, right? Less resistance, more blood goes to that particular tissue. And it's all controlled by, I do squats, these muscles contract. When I do squats, my upper body muscles, at least right now, right, not contracting. So there's not a signal in my chest, in my shoulder muscles, in my arms when I'm doing this to drive more blood there. So I have a certain amount, I start exercising, it stops going here, and it starts going down here. Does that make sense, guys? This is how the individual muscles that contract are going to call blood to them. And the ones that aren't contracting are going to keep not having them. They're going to lose some flow. That way we're sending it where it needs to go specifically. Okay? Now, in addition to autoregulation, there's this idea of what's called
And you have your
extrinsic
first
neural
female
control.
governor.
This is that perivascular sympathetic nervous system
Okay.
innervation. Okay?
Just kidding, Virginia
The
does.
nervous system will send out epinephrine and norepinephrine, which we know go up when we exercise. We know they go up when we get a stress response. Okay? And the smooth muscle on arterioles has different concentrations of specific adrenergic receptors. Okay? So there may be this alpha adrenergic receptor that leads to vasoconstriction, and then we may have some beta receptors on there that leads to vasodilation. So one of the things that happens is generally, when you release epinephrine and norepinephrine, you get dilation to the skin, some dilation to skeletal muscle, but you're going to get constriction to stomach, intestines, kidneys, liver, those areas. Okay? That way we send the same signal, but we get opposite responses solely based upon the concentration of individual receptors for those neurotransmitters or for those hormones. Okay? And so the combination of these two things are going to get us local control for vasodilation and skeletal muscle, extrinsic neural control to stop blood going to kidneys, liver, spleen areas. Okay, so we're shunting it away from one place, sending it all someplace else. Then when you stop exercising, you lose the local signal, you relax the neural signal, so then flow returns back to the stomach, the kidney, the liver, those areas. It falls when it goes to skeletal muscle, and we're back to our kind of regular homeostasis until we move again, or we eat again, or we do whatever we're going to do. So there's this kind of push-pull dance that goes on as our tissues share all of the same volume of blood. Okay. Questions about that? I can promise you that's going to be on the test. Understanding these types of things. Okay. Understanding all of that. Alpha receptors, beta receptors. If I block the endothelium, I can give you stuff to block the endothelium. Okay. I can give you stuff that makes the endothelial function go up. But if I have cardiovascular disease and I block the endothelium, you can't vasodilate. So your blood pressure goes up. You already have chronically high blood pressure, and I give you a beta blocker, blocks these beta receptors, blocks the beta receptors in the heart, I can make your blood pressure go down. They make drugs that are alpha inhibitors. They inhibit the alpha receptors, which they function more peripherally and they prevent some of this constriction. Okay. We use drugs to target these different things, and we can kind of understand how cardiovascular disease works based upon some of this. Okay. We'll spend our last 5 minutes talking about the little brother of the cardiovascular system or little sister of the cardiovascular system that I feel like is under talked about, and that's blood. Okay, that's blood. So blood transports gas, transports nutrients, helps us remove waste, helps us regulate temperature, helps us buffer and balance acidity so we can maintain pH. Blood is unbelievably important. Okay. Unbelievably important, not just for cardiovascular function, but for maintenance of homeostasis in our body. Okay. I used to have a thing, and I should probably make it again. Most of you guys have a blood volume of somewhere between 4 and 6 liters of blood. I used to have 2-liter bottles, like Coke bottles, that I had put water in and put red food coloring in, and I'd bring them in on this day, and I'd set them down and be like, here you go, right? Those of you that are a little smaller in size have about 4 liters of blood in your body. You got two 2-liter bottles, okay? And you see that and you think, God, that's not that much, right? It's really not. It's not that much. Folks on the high end might have 3 2-liter bottles. They might have 6 or thereabouts, okay? Blood volume is highly related to body size and state of aerobic training. Bigger people you need X amount of blood per total X amount of tissue. That ratio stays pretty close. But then if you're highly aerobically trained, you have a larger blood volume than somebody that's not as highly trained. Okay. All right. What is blood made up of? We just talked about this, and it makes me think that maybe I should have done this first. But blood is a fluid, so it's water that also has a bunch of cells in it. Okay. And primarily those cells are red blood cells. So the water in your blood we call plasma. That's not 100% true. I shouldn't say that. Plasma is water plus a few proteins and a couple of other things. But essentially, plasma is water. So your blood is a majority water. Then there is what we call the hematocrit, which is all of the cells. And of those cells, about 99% are red cells. Okay? You have trillions of red blood cells in your body. Trillions. Okay? Turnover of about somewhere between 60 to 90 days. You're always turning over your red blood cells. You also have some white blood cells and you have some platelets. In general, okay, in general, most of you guys are going to be somewhere between maybe the high 30s to about 45% of your blood is red blood cells. You have what we call as a hematocrit percentage, somewhere kind of averages out between 38 and about 45% of your blood is red cells. Okay. That's going to be a little bit different. Some of you that might be mildly anemic, like my wife, a little bit lower. Okay. Some of you that have dehydrated yourself yesterday because it was warm outside and you've gone for a run, it may be a little bit higher because you've lost some plasma. Okay. This percentage, red blood cell percentage, hematocrit percentage, is an unbelievable predictor of VO2 max. Okay. What did Lance Armstrong do that made him a great cyclist or the elite cyclist? He did blood doping. He took a drug called erythropoietin that had him artificially make more red blood cells. So his hematocrit percentage was probably over 50%. Okay. If I give you more red blood cells right now, I have a bag, I have a pint, let's just say, of O negative blood, and I spin it down in a centrifuge and I get all the water out and I just give you red blood cells, I immediately can make your VO2 max go up today, right afterwards, 10, 15%. Having more red blood cells means you can carry more oxygen immediately in the blood. So we know that Lance was a blood doper, one, because he finally admitted it, but one of the things that they do now on people is we know, even if you live at altitude, altitude stimulates making more red blood cells because there's less oxygen, because there's less air. We know that in most people, even if you live basically at base camp on Mount Everest, you're probably not going to ever have naturally more than maybe 50, 51, 52% hematocrit percentage. Okay. Anything over that and you've artificially doped yourself up. Okay. All right. We'll stop here for today. I'm really hopeful we'll finish the cardiovascular system on Friday. Okay. All right. We'll see you guys then.
Right.